Hello and welcome to Outlook's The Outlier, the show where we have top names from the fields of politics, economics, sports, science, literature, the arts, music, and so on for an interesting, informal, and intelligent conversation. Our outlier this week is diplomat, politician, and author Pavan Varma. Pavan has had a long stint with the Indian Foreign Service, serving as the Indian ambassador to many countries. He then joined politics, became an advisor to Bihar Chief Minister Nitish Kumar, holding a cabinet minister's rank. He was the spokesperson for Nitish Kumar's party JDU and was elected as an MP to the Rajya Sabha. Pavan is also the author of many books, including The Life and Times of Ghalib, translations of poetry of Kafi Azmi and Gulzar, a book on Adi Shankaracharya, and his most recent work, The Greatest Ode to Ram, based on Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas. Thank you very much, Pavan, for joining the Outlier. It's a delight to have you on the show.
Pleasure is mine.
I wanted to, you're such a busy man, you usually do about 100 things at a time. I just wanted to ask you, how has this lockdown been for you?
Well, we've all had to make adjustments to the fact that the mobility and the face-to-face contacts we are used to, especially someone in public life and as an author addressing audiences, naturally that was curtailed. But I have discovered two important things as a consequence of the lockdown. One is that a lot of activity which was dispensable has been forcibly made so.
True.
Uh, and secondly, necessity is the mother of invention. And now that we are unable to be in groups directly with people, I find that technology has greatly helped. Now, for instance, I am constantly in webinars, and some of them have very large audiences. It so happened, fortunately or unfortunately, that my book on the Ramcharitmanas, the greatest ode to Lord Ram,
Yeah.
came out just before the pandemic began.
Right.
So I have been speaking about it on the request of organizations and platforms on the web through this medium that you and I are talking about.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that one feedback I received for my interaction on one of them, that while it was live, there were 5,500 plus people who had joined in. Now that is larger than any auditorium can accommodate. So there are pluses and minuses, but I hope we will soon see light at the end of the tunnel, or at
Yeah.
least no virus at the end of the tunnel and be out of it.
As you said, maybe some of the slightly unimportant activities have been, distilled out also.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
I find that a lot of meetings, for instance, where you otherwise met face to face, people traveled, met at a particular place, now happily happen with the same productive results on one of the platforms that people use for conferences.
I wonder if it will continue later too.
I think some parts of it are bound to persist, Satish, because it is a convenience which is unrelated to the compulsion of being housebound.
Yes.
Many people will work from home, uh, and many people will have meetings now from the comfort of their office or study without the necessity of travel. So I think it will have some kind of lasting impact on many of our uh, engagements and interactions.
Yeah. And about the pandemic itself, do you see a glimmer of hope now? The recovery percentage is going up. The in some areas the cases are also kind of coming down. Would you say that we have turned the corner?
I am an incorrigible optimist. So I believe that we are better prepared to handle the virus And ultimately, as Ghalib said, हर बुलंदी के नसीबों में है पस्ती एक दिन. Every pinnacle ultimately also has a downfall.
How
And
true.
so, I think that the virus also will in due course run its course. And some examples I want to laud, for instance, what has happened in Delhi. I have personal experience from several feedbacks. There has been a fairly stringent contact tracing,
Yeah.
testing, and isolation, uh, very well enforced, which has led to a dramatic drop in the pace of the infection, the rate of infections, and certainly across the country with upgraded hospital infrastructure, lesser fatalities.
Yeah.
But we have to yet see what the impact of the disease will be outside urban centers in rural areas
Yeah.
where the health infrastructure is poorer.
You spoke about your recent book, The Greatest Ode to Lord Ram. And, Ram, of course, is back in the news. Not that he was anyway away from it for too long. But, the Ram that you talk about in your book of Tulsidasa's time in Ramcharitmanas and the Ram that we know today, are they completely different?
Well, Ram cannot ultimately be cloned. Ram has to be one, Sri Ram. But there is a certain usage of Sri Ram by people who I feel largely are unaware of the legacy of Maryada Purushottam Ram. So, to sum it up for you, uh, Sri Ram in religion, there is nothing random about divinity. Please understand this.
Okay.
If there is a Leela Purushottam Krishna, there has to be a Maryada Purushottam Ram. Leela Purushottam is the Almighty joyously playing the fool, stealing butter, frolicking with the gopis on the banks of the Vrindavan,
Mhm.
which is also an aspect of divinity and also the Krishna of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, Maryada Purushottam Ram is basically the product not only of faith, which is extremely important, but of the conceptual cerebration, intellectualism of Hinduism. That if you have a Leela Purushottam, you must have a Maryada Purushottam. What does Maryada Purushottam stand for? Maryada Purushottam stands for the epitome of rectitude,
Mhm.
of the role model of correct behavior, of a person who will, not as a passive God, will pursue the cause of justice, even if he has to resort to violence, but within the framework of correct behavior, with complete equipoise and equilibrium, beyond irrational anger, unwarranted violence, or unnecessary vengeance. This is Maryada Purushottam Ram, and let me give two quick examples to you. Why is it that Maryada Purushottam Ram, when Tulsidas wrote to him, and they say that the Ramcharitmanas, Mahatma Gandhi called it the greatest book of devotional literature.
Hmm.
It has also been called the Bible of North India because it is written in the language of the masses, which is Awadhi. So, why did it capture the imagination? It is because of the conduct of Sri Ram. The two examples I'm giving is here is Kaikeyi, his stepmother, who is conspired on the provocation of Manthara, her maid, to ban Sri Ram to the forest for 40 years, 14 years, to see that he does not ascend the throne. It's a conspiracy against him.
Yeah.
Now, here is Maryada Purushottam Ram, who, when he hears of this, goes to meet KK. He does not display anger. He has been wronged, but he is in permanent mental equilibrium. He says to KK, Sun Janani, Soi Sut Bad Bhagi, Jo Pitumat Bachan Anuragi. O mother, that child is blessed who has the right to follow with love the instructions of his parents. That's Maryada Purushottam Ram,
Amazing.
who is never provoked into irrational anger. Or, for instance, let us take what he says to Bharat. He says to Bharat, Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai, par peeda sam nahi athmai. Par hit. There is no greater virtue than the welfare of others, and no greater sin than the injury to others. So this is Maryada Purushottam Ram. Now, when you take Sri Ram without a knowledge of Hinduism, of the Bhakti movement, of the deliberate Maryada Purushottam profile given to Sri Ram, without a full knowledge of the manner in which he conducts himself, even when faced with an opponent, then you are likely to weaponize a slogan rather than a legacy. You weaponize the slogan in a manner which does great harm both to the concept of Maryada Purushottam Sri Ram and to the great legacy of Hinduism. So there is a difference of the manner in which Sri Ram is used by illiterate bigotry, and the tragedy is that they tend to speak on behalf of all Hindus without knowing Hinduism.
Yeah.
And the Maryada Purushottam Ram of Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas or earlier works on Ram. So there is a difference. Having said so, I have welcomed the commencement of the building of the temple for Sri Ram.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask me why, I can explain that as well.
And as you just said, this is this bigotry of of a certain, say, kind of people who have not read so much about Ram. But sir, isn't that what is in currency today? The intellectuals or the people who do know are either silent, are not counted, and the very symbols, the way Jai Shri Ram is said, for instance, or the way Ram is portrayed in this, it's this muscular kind of Ram, So does that disturb you? I mean, that must be worrying?
See, what disturbs me is a larger issue. And in that sense, I believe Hinduism has indeed been wronged for a variety of reasons, including the predominance of a reflexively secularist, not secularist, which I wish to be, reflexively secularist, largely culturally unrooted, left liberal establishment since 1947.
Mhm.
A great deal of the rediscovery of Hinduism and of ancient India and its wisdoms has been glossed over or neglected. If today you say that you wish to explore, investigate ancient India, where Hinduism, as you know, was predominant, and speak of some of its Not that it had no drawbacks. Some of its refinements and achievements, especially in the realm of thought,
Yes.
you are, by some people, immediately conflated with being a Sanghi or being a communal. This kind of approach is very wrong. Great damage has been done to Hinduism, which is why two things have happened. One, a great many Hindus are adrift from the great depth, insight, profundity, and inherent wisdom of Hinduism. Please think to yourself, ancient India or Indian history is contemporaneous with all the great ancient civilizations: Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, Greece.
Yeah.
But in most of those cases, that civilization has been reduced to a museum relic. We need to go back to it. But a great many Hindus are adrift from the treasure house of which they are the natural legatees. You see, people don't understand. What is the great, among the many great strengths? I'm writing a book on this also. One of the great strengths of Hinduism was to adapt.
Yeah.
Now, the most powerful of the six systems of Hindu philosophy, the most powerful system is that of Vedanta, Advaita, non-dualism, where the insights in deep meditation of our sages living in forests is being validated by the latest developments of science today, is that the was not about God. It was about what is the ultimate truth behind the bewildering plurality of this cosmos. And they came up with the notion of Brahm, this cosmic pulsating consciousness, unseen, formless, indivisible, complete, all-knowing, supremely intelligent, and attributeless, nirguna. It's a remarkably audacious concept. When
Absolutely.
people were defining divinity,
Yeah.
here we were defining not godhood, but in search of the ultimate truth, defining something without attributes.
Yeah.
Please try to think of this.
Yeah. Incredible.
But what happens, and I'll finish my argument quickly. What happens? The Nirgun Brahm has never been denied in Hinduism. And let me say to you, please read my book Adi Shankaracharya, which has a chapter called The Remarkable Validation of Science. And I am no Dinanath Batra to suddenly glorify Hinduisms of the past. But cosmology, quantum physics, and neurology are endorsing that by the leading cutting edge scientists across the world. Now, Nirgun Brahm has not been invalidated, but it is a very dry concept to worship. People want a deity to whom they can go, do puja, offer flowers, receive a benediction. So after Shankaracharya, in the 8th century, Adi Shankaracharya, came Ramanujan, who propounded the doctrine of Vishisht Advaita, that yes, this Brahm is all powerful, but precisely for that reason, it has the power within it to manifest itself in the form of an Ishwar, God. And that ultimately over at least a millennium for worship. And that worship led to bhakti, especially after the Islamic invasion, where some considerable degree of damage was done to both living, the tangible and intangible history, heritage of Hinduism. Let us not deny that. One of the reasons why there is a backlash today is because people
Right.
deny such things. It is not my intention to excavate history for acrimony, but you have to acknowledge the truth. Now, how did Hinduism survive that? Having done the philosophical transition from Nirguna Brahm to Sagun Ishwar,
Yeah.
now they democratized Hinduism. Earlier, its main vehicle was Sanskrit. But after Jayadev's Govind in the 12th century, you had a host of remarkable writers writing in the language of the masses. Chandidas wrote in Bengali, Vidyapati wrote in Maithili, Bihari wrote in Surdas wrote, Tulsidas wrote, all in the language of the masses. And we then had the Bhakti movement. Now, people don't understand when they talk of Shri Ram or of Tulsidas, which is such a popular book. Tulsidas's book is as much about the telling of Ram's story as propounded first by Valmiki, maybe 2000, 2500. Take a period you like years ago.
Hmm.
Tulsidas's Sri Ramcharitmanas is equally a book of philosophy. It is taking forward the essential dialectic of Hinduism between the Nirguna ultimate and the Sagun form of it. Attributeless and attributeful. According to Tulsidas, Sri Ram is both Nirgun and Sagun. Please try to follow the intricacy of this argument. For instance, he writes, Aguna Sagun, Nirgun Sagun, Aguna Sagun, Doi Brahma Swarupa, Akath Agath Anadi Anupa. Both Nirgun and Sagun are two aspects of Brahma.
Hmm.
And who actualizes both is Sri Ram. And how does he do it? By the simple recourse to absolute surrender, bhakti. Once you do bhakti, for instance, Tulsidas writes, Agun Arup Alakh Ajjoyi. Nirgun, Agun, Arup, formless, Alakh, Ajjoyi, unborn. That's Brahma.
Hmm.
Bhagati Prema Bas. Saguna ho joy. Because of the bhakti of the devotee, this attributable formless Sagun form and takes on the form of Shri Ram, to whom your salvation lies in bhakti. Because Hinduism, as you know, is such an
Yeah.
eclectic religion. It allows for moksha through the Gyan Marg, knowledge, Bhakti Marg, devotion, or karma, the performance of your duties, the highest form being Nishkam Karma,
Hmm.
done without expectation of reward.
Hmm.
All three are paths to that higher moksha. And Tulsidas's path is Bhakti. So, Sri Ram, Tulsidas, Hinduism, its origins, its evolution, its adaptation, these are things we should know about. Only then can we counter bigoted Hinduism. Otherwise, we can't.
Yes.
If we know more about Shakespeare than Kalidas,
Yeah.
if we are foes of the West, if we have no knowledge of our own culture, tradition, philosophy, legend, literature, name it, we cannot counter them. That's why I lament the fact that so many Hindus, and that is also understandable because Hinduism,
So why do you think that this space that you are talking about, nobody has been able to capitalize or get politically use this?
politically now, if I were to shift my hats,
Yes,
The
let's.
greatest sign of today is the complete and abject failure of a pan Indian opposition. We don't have it.
Yeah.
The largest national opposition party refuses to reinvent itself. I have written publicly one of my
Hmm.
columns in perhaps the largest English newspaper, the Times of India. I said it that the whole notion of dynastic succession is repugnant to democracy. I have
Apart from
nothing personal against the guy. I knew most of them personally as well and still know them. It's
but
nothing about that.
apart from the Congress itself, I mean, which you are referring to, I guess. But if you take, from the south, the east, in the west, even the regional parties, local parties, which had sort of secular attributes, which started off like that. But like say when something like this Shilanyas happens for the Ram temple, none of them have an answer. I mean, they all are either silent or toe the line.
You see, it's a dual jeopardy. One is what I call siloization, and one is co-option.
Hmm.
Regional parties work in silos. They are now, especially under an aggressive BJP, making new inroads into states where its presence was limited,
Right.
under pressure, trying to hold on to their bastions with no larger national vision. The second is co-option. Look at a Mayawati. On whose side is she?
Yeah.
Look at what has happened to Akhilesh Yadav ji, young leader with potential, largely unseen or on the margins. So, yes, there are regional strongholds, but they do very little to create a credible opposition because they work in silos and refuse to network. They need, much like Prakriti needs Purush in Hindu philosophical terms, the touch of the enabling mechanism of a pan Indian opposition party. Purely on empirical evidence, that is only the Congress party now.
Hmm.
But the Congress party is moribund. The Congress party refuses to reinvent itself.
Hmm.
That is the current situation of our politics.
You also had a real dive into Indian politics.
Yes.
You joined JDU and you were there for quite some time. So how does it, as a like an intellectual, as a man who has served so much with the Indian Foreign Service, with a vast experience of administration, how does politics look? How does politics looks from in the inside?
Well, it depends on what you want to look at and get involved with. This is the choice before every person in public life. Uh, there is a seamier side of politics: money, muscle, caste,
Yeah.
and nepotism. You've got to deal with it. To some extent, there is no profession anywhere which is entirely insulated from distortion or undesirable elements. So you deal with it. But what does politics do to you? It gives you a much wider platform to be able to talk about what you think is right than any other profession, including the media.
Hmm.
So I went to politics because I felt I had something to say and I chose a leader. There was much surprise in both the BJP and the Congress that I went to a relatively smaller party. When I decided to resign from the foreign service and take to public life, But I joined a dynamic leader with the correct vision, with administrative acumen, with proven electoral competence, Nitish Kumar.
Right.
And I have never regretted it. And he has been very kind to me. But when I left, it was again on a matter of principle, where I believe that Mr. Nitish Kumar has strayed from the level of idealism with which he was associated when I joined.
Hmm. And what would you say, would you attribute that to? Is it sort of electoral compulsions, the sort of political compulsion, especially with a tie up with the BJP?
No, it's not about tying up with party A or party B. It is that you cannot continue to do that ad infinitum and believe that the halo around you as a man who stood for a certain political ideology, philosophy, or principles will remain intact. You can't keep doing it. Mr. Nitish Kumar had the potential of emerging on the national scale
True.
as one of the key leaders. He volitionally destroyed that.
Somebody who has got such political acumen and who's been there for so long, why do you think he wouldn't see this?
Sometimes there is in politics always the dilemma between short term game and long term benefit. Many times political leaders choose short term game
Hmm.
and forego long term benefit.
Yeah.
For instance, I'm not against his joining the BJP except to the extent where it compromises his lifelong and publicly stated beliefs. Like I believe happened when JDU supported the CAA NRC combo, not just the CAA, the combination of the two.
Yeah.
I believe it was wrong. For instance, at the time when the Gathbandhan with the RJD, which came to power in 2015, was dismantling or dissembling or likely to break. Why is it that Mr. Nitish Kumar, for pursuing long term benefit, did not resign and say, I will not compromise with communalism? I have said it, or with corruption? I have said it. I do not mind being out of office.
Yeah.
And I will work for the people and pursue my ideology like an ordinary man. There would have been a groundswell of support for it.
Yeah.
But nobody beyond a point is willing to trust
Yeah.
neither the RJD nor the BJP. Somebody who, with such felicity, keeps shifting loyalties for political survival. And Mr. Nitish Kumar, of all the people in politics that I have been close, was the last person who should feel the need to do so. Both
Absolutely.
are
Yeah.
educated, eloquent.
And all reports so far seem to predict that it's going to be a sweep again in the coming Bihar elections of the combine, of the JDU BJP combine. What do you think?
What is may happen in Bihar, I'm not a prophecy, but it again is mirroring, illustrating the basic dilemma in the in Bihar. The JDU is currently, in my view, fairly unpopular for its handling of the COVID crisis, including Mr. Nitish Kumar himself.
Mhm.
part of this anger or unpopularity has also extended naturally to his alliance partner, which is the BJP. But to a lesser extent, in my view, I could be wrong. The reason why the BJP JDU may still win if elections happen in these extraordinary circumstances is not because of their absolute popularity, but because of the absolute bankruptcy of the opposition.
Yeah, it is non-existent. Yeah. And I was, before we close, I wanted to touch upon another area of interest of yours where you have done great work, which is Urdu poetry, the Urdu Shairi. You've written books on Ghalib, you've translated Kafi Azmi, you've translated Gulzar Sahab, and, you're generally so much interested
And Atal Bihari Vajpayee.
and Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Where does Urdu Shairi, Urdu poetry stand today? I mean, it seemed to have in the 80s and the early 90s, it had some kind of, this ghazal phenomena happened, with Ghulam Ali and Pankaj Udas, etc. But what state is it in now? Are there any young poets? Are there any?
Yes. You see, uh, I don't believe the tradition is in any way dead.
Mhm.
It's a very powerful tradition. Ghalib was an extraordinary poet. So were his two contemporaries, Momin and Zauq.
Yeah.
And there have been a string of poets after that. It's not dead. What happens is that there is no, I don't want to call it authority, but no accepted touchstone of validating good, mediocre, and bad poetry.
Hmm.
So, a lot of poetry which just rhymes passes off as poetry.
Yeah.
The depth of thought, for instance, in Ghalib's composition, I've translated Gulzar Saab, although he doesn't often write in rhyme and meter, mostly
Yeah.
doesn't. Some of his poems are profoundly beautiful. So, that is point number one. Secondly, people are struggling to find outlets. See, Ghalib used to walk down to the ultimate Qila-e Mualla, the Red Fort, where the titular, even if he was titular Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar used to organize a mehfil of poets. Where does a young Urdu poet walk to
But
today?
there are now so many avenues, isn't it? Like say YouTube. I mean, there is a digital platform, where things can. I mean, suddenly you do find these sparks, these talents.
See, of course, look at the discovery, not the discovery, he has been around for very long, the popularity of Rahat Undori.
Yeah,
जो आज साहिब मसनद हैं कल नहीं होंगे किराएदार है जाती मकान थोड़ी है सभी का खून शामिल है यहाँ की मिट्टी में किसी के बाप का हिंदुस्तान थोड़ी है पावरफुल पोएट्री
so who
what
writes like this now? Does anybody write like this?
I think there are people who in their own way Javed Akhtar writes others write but it's scattered for lack of patronage for lack of funds, for lack of more frequent platforms, for lack of projection, publicity. Now, these are things we need to do not only with Urdu poetry, for Hindi magazines, for Hindi book reviews.
Yeah,
It's a strange phenomena of our country that a foreigner has to tell me. As I wrote in my book many years ago, Becoming Indian, why is it in your airlines they distribute only English newspapers?
yeah,
Never a paper from your own language. In a country which has 24 languages which go back 2,500 years, 4,000 years, with their own corpus of literature, their own treasury of vocabulary.
true.
Why?
Thank you very much, Pavan. It's been a great conversation, as it always is with you. Thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much for taking the time out for the outlier.
Thank you so much, Satish.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Pavan.